I've got my own page. That's a very good cause. I'd encourage everyone to go down and think it's ironic, isn't it? The only museum that's going to charge is the local history book. Yeah, hasn't got much competition, has it? Anyway, so here, welcome back to part two. Hope you're all suitably refreshed. We did have an update about elder subs, but I can't remember what the update was actually. Do you remember what it was, Rose? It was yeah. Anyway, we saved it for the end. But there's an update. There's an update about that. Yeah. So welcome to part two. I've called this section "Turning a Camp into a Park." I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment, but I will try in this section to refer to it as Slade Park as opposed to Slade Camp. All will become clear in a little bit. So we left it just after the end of the Second World War and the changes that were going on in Old Road Camp, POW camp, and how that was going to be a template for change in Oxford itself. But around Oxfordshire, you could I don't know if you know, but there were so many military camps around Oxford. It was used. There were so many airfields, West on the Green, Abingdon, so many places. And around Oxford, there were many military camps that were used for accommodation for squatting after the Second World War. Steventon Army Camp in between Abingdon and Didcot was used for accommodation. Checkenden Army Camp near Henley was turned into a hostel for displaced Polish families arriving in the UK. You can still go to there and still see the remains of the Checkenden camp in the woods. Just Google it and you'll find about that. That's a nice day trip. And also RAF Mount Farm, which was squatted after World War II. The community that squatted there formed the basis for the creation of Berensfield. So Berensfield is actually the basis of that. It's a squatting community after World War II. Now, possibly Slade Camp hadn't been squatted because of the proximity to the army barracks at Hollow Way, and the fact that soldiers were still stationed there, were sentry duty, and maybe also the fact it was slightly isolated, slightly out of the way. Maybe people didn't know what actually was there because it had been so heavily guarded during the Second World War. It's not really clear. But I'm going to start out with just reading these letters. These are dated September 30th, 1949. And they're from the council, and it says here, "Dear Sir, Madam, your housing application has had the consideration of the Housing Allocation Subcommittee, and have instructed me to offer you hut number 141B at Slade Camp, the Slade. The camp has been taken over by the City Council for housing purposes, and the huts will soon possibly be converted. In the meantime, you are requested to take up occupation without delay. If, however, you are unable to move immediately, please do not fail to notify my assistant at the Housing Inquiry Office, the Slade Camp. The charge for accommodation at the hut will be 5 shillings per week, plus a further 2 and 6 per week in respect of rates. The total weekly charge, therefore, will be 7 and 6 per week. I shall be glad if you will call at the Housing Inquiry Office, the Slade Camp, and bring this letter with you. You will then be given any relevant information. Electrical lighting is available, and you should bring 1 or 2 electric light bulbs with you. I regret the short notice, but it is unavoidable in the circumstances." This comes with an adjoining letter, perhaps given at the council office, at the Slade Camp office. "Use of Slade Camp for housing purposes. Further information for occupants. Number 1, new occupants should arrange to put up curtains immediately and take up occupation without delay. If you have not already done so, you should register at the fuel office for your supplies of fuel. Dustbins are available and should be collected from the camp office. It may be unwise to cut linoleum prior to conversion taking place. Individual lavatory accommodation will shortly be provided. Plans for the conversion of the huts are being prepared. But of necessity, there will be some delay before the actual work can be commenced." So, what you can glean from those documents is there's a sense of urgency. It's a making best of the situation, and don't be too hasty cutting your liner. So the things that come out. These documents were actually only available to me through one of the ex-residents, a woman called Christine Simlet. She was here last night. and Christine gave these documents, and they've been really transformative in giving some context, giving some sense of what it was like at this time from the council's point of view, from new occupants' point of view, from the urgency, and also as well, it tells you something about how these documents are treated by families. You know, Christine grew up at the camp, but obviously her parents kept these documents, she's kept these documents, and it just shows you that these kind of documents are very important to people, they're very important to individuals. We've all got a shoebox or a piece of luggage under the bed that's full of documents, full of things you can't quite throw away, full of things that are meaningful, full of things often official. But I think the fact that Christine kept these and is able to pass these on really shows that for a lot of people these things were really vital, they're really important. It was official, this was the start of a new opportunity, a start of a new life, especially in the aftermath of the Second World War. So I think even the fact that these documents are kept and we're able to preserve them, and we're able to interpret them and put some meaning into them, I think is really, really special and important. That's been one of the big takeaways of this project. It's amazing what people keep. It's amazing what is meaningful for people. Like I say, these aren't big grants, not the Magna Carta, but it means something within the context of that person's life and that family's life. So these papers are from September 1949, but people had already started to live in the camp the previous year. Now, sorry, I should have clicked on. These are the documents I've just read out. Sorry, I should have shown you that. That would have been handier. But these are the copies of the documents that Christine gave, so absolutely fabulous. But they're from 1949, but actually people had already started living in the camp the previous year. The Breakin family, one of the first to move into the camp in November 1948. Writing in the Oxford Mail in 2011, Mr. Breakin recalled moving into a hut that would become 4th Avenue. Our hut was a single room with no water, one light and a fire stove against the end wall. The toilets were in a separate area and the water was collected from a standpipe at the corner of the road. We had a key to our own toilet cubicle. The hut was about 80 foot long, and you can imagine that this small stove did not heat the room very well. The council delivered coke and distributed it in piles at various places around the camp. We were told by the council to take what we needed from other huts, which were not suitable for living in, wood panels and timber, etc., and use it to improve our hut. So you've got a sense here really of a bit of make, do, amend. People being asked to go up to the huts. They're for military use, they're not for personal use. Go up there, make the best of it. There's no internal facilities, you're using the ablutions block. You've got a key to the ablutions block, external loos. This is like the worst version of Centre Parks you can possibly imagine. And I think you had to have a certain spirit, a certain desire to go in. And it's interesting as well that I think Jock says in here, he said moving into a hut that would become on 4th Avenue, would become a number. People moved into these huts, they were just given numbers. They were just it wasn't a road number, it's just that's hut 147. You know, there's no romance here at all. Essentially, there's a hut, go there and get on with it. Another family who moved in around the same time was the Bell family. Now, I had the enormous pleasure to interview Agnes Bell, who was one of the pioneers who came to the camp. And Agnes was in the audience last night. She's 97 years old, and she's one of the few people who actually, a lot of the memories we get are from children who grew up at the camp. Agnes is perhaps one of the few people that we've met who actually lived at the camp, actually worked at the camp. Fascinating stories. She threw in as just an aside, she said, oh yes, at 16 I worked at the press steel on the assembly lines during the Second World War. So I did say to her, you in any of these pictures, Agnes? You know, it's absolutely extraordinary extraordinary stories. I won't tell Agnes's story because I'm very aware that when you have an opportunity like this to tell recollections that you've been given, nobody can tell it better than the people themselves. And as part of this project, we've done oral history recordings, and Agnes has told her story. But there are certain things that she described to me, the challenges of moving into the accommodation before any modifications had taken place. The huts, as Jock Breakin described, were very basic, limited heating, very, very basic bathroom facilities. And Agnes at this stage is newly married, she's 20 years old, and she's got a 3-month-old child, and winter's sort of on the horizon. She and her husband John, she'd recently married John. John was actually over in Oxford looking for work. He was from Southern Ireland. He was working at the press steel. That will become a theme that comes through. And she said that they'd acquired some rationed furniture. Furniture in the aftermath of the Second World War was rationed, and she had a table, 4 chairs, and a sideboard, and a bed and 2 armchairs, which she told me didn't look too bad in 2 rooms, which I think is, making the best of it. Bit of IKEA minimalism going on. Agnes said that families were able to improve their accommodation by using materials from other vacant huts. But when the army got wind that new tenants were taking furniture from other huts, they took the items back, piled them up in the barrack square, and they burnt them. Yeah. Which seems incredibly severe, incredibly, you can imagine, incredibly military. That's not yours, we're going to burn it in front of you. So things clearly weren't easy for these pioneers. But as the letters I read out suggest, the council did have plans to improve the accommodation and attract more people to the camp. So, it wasn't all bad. And the council started to make it known that accommodation was available on the site. And we found out again from interviews with past residents that leaflets were dropped indoors through the local area to advertise the fact. And people have told us stories about their family, dads jumping on a bike, rushing up to Slade camp to the office that was there because they knew that accommodation was available. Because there was huge pressure, as I say, on accommodation in Oxford. And often the people worst affected were young families. Soldiers returning from the war, because there was a baby boom going on, there was employment at the press steel, employment at Maurice Motors, but nowhere to live. So often these young families were living in shared accommodation, often with relatives, or renting, or sharing with other families, not particularly desirable. So what the council decided to do was to embark on a series of improvements, renovations. And what they did was they set up, all these things go out to tender, and they split the camps up into groups of into numbered groups. So there was group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, and these were huts that were going to be improved, and they were going to be put out to tender to local businesses. You can see on there, I think it says bill of quantities, conversion of huts into temporary accommodations, group number 1. And again, as I say, these were just numbers. They didn't actually have addresses. Group number 1 was a group of huts just up here in this area, just around the Slade. Actually, just on Peppercorn Avenue that I'll talk about later. Peppercorn Avenue is still there. But again, remember, this whole camp was sweeping all the way down from the Ridings, all the way down to the Slade. This is group of huts number 1, just here. Now, this is an application for Knowles and Son to convert 23 huts into temporary dwellings dated March 1950. All these documents are down in the town hall. Interestingly enough, here's the group of huts here, the 23 huts marked in red, Peppercorn Avenue just here. My trademark blue arrow just here is denoting that is Wood Farm. That is Wood Farm, not the estate, Wood Farm as in the operating farm. Milk being collected here for a dairy that was on Cinnaminter Road. They're the old farm buildings that were eventually knocked down in the 1970s. Now, the conversion that Knowles and Son were applying for was the conversion of Type A huts. This is a diagram again. This is to convert a Type A hut into a 4-bedroom dwelling. So a single dwelling for one family. There's details of sockets, moving the stove, putting obscure gas. So making 4 bedrooms, dining space, a living room space, a kitchen, a lobby, and a hall. More detailed plans just here. So, always nice to see old plans, they're beautiful. So the total cost of this conversion was going to be £9,610. That's roughly £300,000 in today's money. Kingley, another local firm, were asked to convert 7 huts in Group 5. Group 5 is a bit further up. Here's Group 1 down here in the Slade. Group 5 is much closer to the Ridings, up towards the top of the camp. These are type B and C huts, and these are being divided into 2 dwellings. So this double line here is the division between the 2 dwellings. One on this side is a 2-bedroom dwelling, and on this side is a 3-bedroom dwelling. You can see there's a bathroom on this side. What they do is, if you look at this plans, this is the plan actually they replicate. So this is actually for a Type C dwelling, but essentially what they do is they say they're slightly different, but they're the same. So they double over the plans. But this is essentially they're going to have indoor bathrooms, going to have indoor facilities. There's obviously a bit more work in dividing these huts up. So the conversion of 7 huts is going to be £6,817, which is roughly £200,000 in today's money. There are some interesting little tender notes that are attached to all of these things. It says here, it is essential that each individual hut be completed and handed over for occupation in the shortest period of time, and a progress chart is to be prepared in conjunction with the architect and housing manager to ensure that the contractor does not start work in more huts than his labour force of all trades can expeditiously complete. So very, very clear about that. They want things done quickly and they want things done in the right way. Lots of things done in the right way. There's also another little note that caught my eye. Note, the workmen will be allowed to use the existing latrine accommodation on the camp, and the contractor should acquaint himself with the locality of the latrines. And it is to make such allowance in his prices for lost time of his workmen should the latrines be in excessive distance from the work. It's very specific. No wasting time going to the loo. Again, it shows you well there is a degree of urgency, there is a degree of desire to get these huts turned around as quickly as possible. Here we see the park, and it's also interesting to note that within the park there were not just one type of hut, not one type of accommodation. There would have been a range of buildings. Some of the huts would have been bigger, smaller, depending on the military use. Also, well, for example, there would have been brick built buildings. So if you were a family lucky enough, for example, to get into the pay office, which I think is that building just up there, that was a brick built building that already had a loo inside, that already had a base inside. If you got into the officers' quarters, again, the same thing applied. So there were different sorts of accommodation in there, but the vast majority of them were wooden huts that needed to be converted. This is a plan, I think, from Kingsley's or Knowles, I can't remember what it is. This is a plan to convert an A-type hut. The thing I want to point out there is that previously we were talking about Slade Camp. And in the original tender documents it says Slade Camp. But there's a point at which Slade Camp becomes Slade Park. So there's a desire here to say, I mean, who wants to live on a military camp? Nobody does. This is clearly a recognition from the council to say this is now a residential area. You know, it's not centre camp, is it? It's centre parks. So we've got Slade Camp. Slade Camp becomes Slade Park. It sounds like a far more attractive place for someone to live. And this is shown in the Savage family. So the Savage family were evacuated from East London to Cowley, and they, as usual, associated with work at the Press Steel. On the 14th of October 1949, they were moved to 101 Slade Camp. And on the 27th of April 1951, they were moved to 59 First Avenue, Slade Park. So even that period there with the council, they've started off in the camp, and they've moved into a park. I think what you find is, again, a very, very similar tale. A young family looking for a fresh start, close proximity to the car works. But as I say, the main source of information we get about what life was like on the camp is from the children who lived there. And one big contribution to this project is a gentleman called Alan Briggs. Alan lives up in St Anne's now, but there's Alan just there in his Scout's uniform, sitting outside his hut next to his brother Stephen, his mum and his dad. That's a family friend just there, and Alan's contributed these pictures and very generously said I could do that. And again, I'd like to use his words because Alan has written a really interesting memoir about growing up at Slade Camp. This is what I've done here. I've turned the map around. So this is Lye Valley. That is actually Brasenose Farmhouse, the fancy kitchen shop. This is the Slade here. This is looking eastwards towards the top of the ridings here. So we're looking that way towards Shotover. And the hut that Alan is sitting outside is that hut just there. So it's that one just there. Have that in your mind. This is a picture of Alan standing outside that hut with a gun. Now, there was no armoury on the place. He hasn't said, I found a gun. They found a gun at Slade Park. No, this is a toy gun, but this is him as a young child, and this is Alan's memoir. So he's born on the 14th of June 1943 in Headington, Oxford. His father His father, James Thomas Briggs, was born in Egremont, Cumbria in 1910. His mother, Mary Forsyth Briggs, was born in Whitehaven, Cumbria in 1916. His brother Stephen was born on the 6th of July 1951 at 92 4th Avenue, Slade Park. So in there. This is him talking about his early years. They were married in 1940 in Whitehaven. On leaving school, Dad went to work as a miner at the iron ore mine near Egremont. He met Mum in 1937, but by 1938 he decided they had no future if he stayed in the mine. So he moved to Oxford and started work at the Pressdale factory in Cowley. The Briggs family moved on to the camp in 1948. It would have been with the Brecons and the Bell and early sort of pioneers. Alan sent this photograph. That's his mum standing outside the camp. He says here, the photo shows the state of the hut and its surroundings. My mum is either forlornly gazing or taking in the peace of quiet. It's probably a little bit of both, because if you're a young wife and you've turned up with 2 kids and that's your house, well, you're going to have to make the best of it a little bit. He says here we are allocated the whole empty hut, 94th Avenue. Dad put up temporary partitions based around the stove on the near end in the picture. So I think on this end just here, so that's where the stove was. There must have been an ablution spot nearby, but I have no memory of it. I do remember, though, the uniformed soldier who at dusk each evening marched around the camp, switching on the street lights, which had individual switches on their pitch pine poles. In 1950, Oxford City Council converted our hut into 2 residences. We stayed in the 3-bedroom version and the concrete entrance door in the coal hole, which became number 92. So this hut was split into 2. I think it must have been a Type B or a Type C hut, so it split into 2. And while that conversion was taking place, the family had just had to simply move into another part of it. You know, again, make do amend, and so they had to share that hut with another family. Alan goes on. Dad staked out our garden around 3 sides of 92. He cleared the rough turf. He used it to build a turf and rubble bank, which then accommodated a low wire fence on top. Now, Alan also sent down these sketches. These are his memories about what the house looked like. So it says here, the Tooks. The Tooks were next door. So the Briggs are on one side, the Tooks are on the other side, and these are his memories about what his house looked like. This is him talking about his bedroom. My bedroom was entered directly from the living room. My single bedroom abutted the end wall of the hut. The window overlooked the upper garden. For a time I had nightmares about the manhole cover directly below the window. I thought evil came up from it, but I grew out of it. At the bottom end, Dad built me a working area with a desktop, shelves for my many books, with a special shelf for my prized possession, a 3-masted galleon built by my Uncle Joe. Under the window, I had a stand which held my small aquarium containing my goldfish, namely Oscar, Benny, and Flip and Flop, who came to a frozen death one very cold winter and were subsequently interned in a quiet area of the garden. I think what's really special about those memories that Alan's given there is that he's got such a clear memory about growing up there. And he's got such a, he's back there. He's back in his bedroom with that galleon built by Uncle Joe with his goldfish that sadly died in the winter. And he remembers so vividly, I think, his parents striving and trying to make this place a home. And I know that study area meant that eventually he passed his 11+. He went to Southfield Grammar School. And interestingly enough, he said that he experienced a strange kind of experience whereby if he was considered slightly posh when he was on the camp because he went to a grammar school. When he went to a grammar school, he was ridiculed because he came from Slade Park. So everyone's individual story, everyone's individual experience of living on Slade Park is slightly different. So I'm very loath to say, oh, it's just like this, it's just like that. Everyone's experience of living on this park would have been very, very different. And when you talk to some of the ex-residents, often the park with the residential area was quite big. So some people would say, oh, I never went up to 9th Avenue. I didn't know anyone on 4th Avenue. Even within that, you know what it's like, you're living in your own neighbourhood. Sometimes you know, I never walked out that street, I never know these people, or I never go to that pub. And it was the same on Slade Park. Slade Park was no different to anywhere else. There were petty jealousies, there would have been people you knew, people you didn't know. It pulsed to the same rhythm as other places. But what you find is that a community in this area was starting to develop. So you see Slade Park here emerging. There's washing on the line just here. If you look at this photograph here, you see there's a delivery van here. What looks like a milk trolley is coming up here to deliver milk. Cars have been bought. There's now cars parked in front of the huts. If you look closely here, there's a man on a roof doing some repairs. And just like Alan's dad, areas of land are being fenced off. From what we can gather, nobody was given a garden. You just took as much as you wanted. But within that garden, you put a fence around it. It became yours. You'd start to plant vegetables. You'd start to plant trees, decorative plants, flowers, all those sorts of things. Slowly, people came in here. They cut the grass down. It became a place that you could call your own. It's a place where you could settle. It was your little bit of paradise on the foothills of Shotover. And also, you get then people then starting the development of the community. Memories come through about going to the shops. So people often ask, well, where were the shops? A lot of the things were delivered. So there'd be a bread delivery, a meat delivery. There was also a fish and chip van that came round, fondly remembered, an ice cream van, even more fondly remembered. The Corona man delivering fizzy drinks. But the nearest shops for people here was Cinnaminter Road. So you'd walk down through the camp to the Slade. You'd walk over to Cinnaminter Road, and there would be a huge array of shops there, including the dairy that was being serviced by Wood Farm. So not too far to walk. They'd jump on a bus down Holloway, you'd go over to Cowley, or you go into the shops in town. So that was where you would connect. And all people would tell us stories about going to, there was Tilly's General Store on Old Road. There was a big sweet shop where they'd go there and buy sweets. So lovely sort of memories going on. And the children themselves, there would be lots of memories about living about living in Shotover, and about, you had a whole sort of playground, a big forested playground on your doorstep. What's interesting as well, if you look here, that now Slade Park is now here, very much Slade Park is included in Kelly's directory. So here's from Kelly's directory, telling you about who lives where. And here they no longer live in numbered houses. These are not like, they're not 147B. These are now houses that sit on avenues. The names don't change, so it's 6th Avenue, 9th Avenue. They still retain the army names, but now they have proper numbers, proper house numbers to deliver mail to, and all the other things you would expect. And some of the names that I've already mentioned up here previously. I'm thinking about Bell, Briggs, for example, Breakin and Bell. All those names are included up there. And what's interesting to note is, for example, Alan Briggs's parents, they were from Cumbria originally. The Breakin family were from Scotland. John Bell, Agnes's husband, was from Southern Ireland. Another pioneer was a gentleman called Bill Risk. He was Canadian. He had been there with the Canadian Army, married a local girl and stayed. So this was a very cosmopolitan mix of people who were here at Slade Camp. And again, we often think about Oxford being a very provincial place, but what the car factory did, it really opened up this area to a huge number of people coming in from all over the country. One name that really sticks out on here is this name, and you get the feeling he's not a local lad. So I've got to say, if I get this right in my mind, it's Jan Sverczynski. I think I'm right, because I interviewed his daughter, who's Hannah Bentley, and she was telling me about her father. And Jan's story is very interesting. He lived at 73 4th Avenue. He'd moved his family down from Lancashire, from the Blackpool area, to get some work at the press steel factory. There's Jan just there with his children. What was interesting about Jan was that Jan had served in 304 Polish Bomber Squadron. He flew Wellingtons during World War II. After the invasion of his country, he had travelled with some of his other fellow pilots from the Polish Air Force over mainland Europe. Some of his colleagues had been killed en route. Eventually, he made it to the UK, and he flew Wellingtons over Germany. On one particular mission, they were lucky to survive, for which he was awarded the Vitary Military, which is that medal just there, which is the Polish equivalent of the Victoria Cross. So you've got these incredible stories that are coming out of that are coming out of the camp, a really sort of cosmopolitan area. But like I say, a lot of the stories that you have are coming from the children themselves. And I should just flick through. So always a trouble with Here we go. So, a lot of the stories that you get are from the children themselves. And going back to Alan Briggs, these are his childhood memories of growing up. And I imagine how exciting it would have been, you know, in a time really before television and social media, to grow up in a place, on an old army camp where there would have been an assault course, a firing range, the woods have shot over on your doorstep, how exhilarating that would have been. So this is Alan's recollection. He says, in the camp, there were large areas of open land. Below our hut, the field ran down to a brook that was lined with tall poplars. Over the brook, there was the remains of an army assault course, which was excellent for exciting games of cowboys and Indians. Further away, there was a rifle range, a very tall brick wall before the target area, a sort of sandbank, and in front there was a trench from which the soldiers must have fired. This place was a treasure trove for us, and we found live bullets, brass cases and other fragments. It was also forbidden ground, which made it even more exciting. This was supported by Patrick Cummins, who moved to his family to 9th Avenue in 1948. This is his recollection from the Oxford Mail a couple of years ago. He said, we would dig through the soil to find live shells and then use a nail and hammer to get them to fire. It was a miracle we never got killed, but I loved it there. It was the best time of my life. So there's a message there for people: forget screens, give kids live ammunition. And they will surely thrive. I think though you have to. There's a couple of things you have to sort of say at this point, and one of them is that in terms of the people's recollections you have, often the people who come forward in local history project and oral history project like this are the people who have good experiences in the place. You often don't hear from people who have bad experiences in the place. So always kind of temper your view of that with individual experiences and the fact that, you know, we only have the memories that we do have. I think it's also fair to say that while the children may have thought they lived in paradise, it's really not clear what some of the adults were thinking about this. If they thought this was a particularly good place to be, if they loved the seclusion, if they loved the fact that they were essentially living in old army huts on the foothills of Shotover, I'm sure for some they loved it, and I'm sure for other people they couldn't wait to escape and get out and move into new accommodation themselves. And I think the other thing we should say is that, you know, life in a camp like this was not going to be in a part like this was not going to be completely idyllic. This is a warning note that came for the people at Slade camp. It said, "This is fire precautions. Do not light fires outside of the hut. Burn rubbish in the incinerator. Exercise care in disposing of cigarette ends and matches. The utmost care must be exercised with electrical appliances, and any defects in the installation should be reported without delay. All fires, however, should be reported immediately." There's a little appendix. There's a deadly nightshade. Care must be taken, especially with children, as the poisonous plant deadly nightshade is to be found in the vicinity of the camp. So you've got danger of fire. You've got danger of the deadly nightshade. There's also another letter that came in 1950 where it says, I have been informed there has been the practice of some tenants disposing of their wastewater in the rainwater drains or on the ground nearby their huts. If this continues and becomes a general habit, it is likely to affect the health of the residents of Slade Park, and the medical officer of the health is very concerned with the possibility of an epidemic arising. So there's lots of other things that wouldn't commend you to living in Slade camp. And that mention of fire, well, in 1962 there was a bit of a fire at 74 9th Avenue. According to the fire brigade report, the structure and its contents were severely damaged. I think, yeah, they're pretty much severely damaged there. And it was heat radiating from the flue pipe in the huts. I'm really amazed that this didn't actually happen more often. But yes, there was also that danger. So living in the camp, and also as well, remember that this was only ever going to be a temporary thing for the people who were living there. So this is an image here of the complete camp. This is probably taken, I would say, in sort of the mid-1950s. What you can see in the background there with the usual blue arrow is the creation of Wood Farm. This is going to be the new estate. And Wood Farm is going to provide some of the accommodation that's going to hopefully solve the housing problem within Oxford itself. The construction on Wood Farm started in 1953 on land sold to the council by William Maurice. But the big change that's going to come is the construction of the ring road. The construction of the ring road splits the camp in two. It's built in 1959, and the western section here really gets consumed, gets assimilated into Wood Farm and Greater Headington. One of the interesting things is about when you ask people in Slade Park where they felt they were, which bit of Oxford would you say you were in? Almost all of them said we're in Headington. So this was very much seen as a part of Headington. Headington itself was changing, new estates were being constructed, and everything on the western side was gradually being incorporated into the greater expansion of Wood Farm and Cowley. But the eastern half is left marooned on the Shotover side of the bypass. There's mooted. There's going to be a bridge constructed, never constructed, an underpass. None of those things actually ever happened. And although traffic would have been greatly reduced during this time, the construction of the bypass would mean that getting across this road would become increasingly difficult. This is not long after the bypass was constructed. This is looking towards the car works here. This is the fancy kitchen shop just here. I'm glad I got all my word. That's fantastic. This is the fancy kitchen shop just here, Brasenose, and this is where Aldi would be. Aldi would be just here. And what it meant was that suddenly, if you were on the Shotover side of the camp, it became increasingly difficult to just pop over to Cinnamington Road, and you were physically separated from the western side of the camp that was being redeveloped. Also, as well, you get the sense that there was suddenly there was slightly more stigma if you're on that side of the camp because you were isolated, you were cut off. And also, as well, it meant that if you were a child going to school, you were picked up by a bus. A temporary lay-by was constructed on the Shotover side of the camp, and the kids were bussed in and out of different areas. This is looking towards Shotover along the bypass. If you look closely, these are the huts. You can see the huts in the woods. Shotover's on the top here. You can still see the huts constructed. You can see how close they are to the bypass itself. Oxford, I say, was changing. Forester's Tower was finished in 1965. That's at Wood Farm. 15 floors, 85 homes. And a lot of the people we interviewed for this project have memories of this being constructed, built around them, this looming up. The first tenants moved into Blackbird Leys in 1958. And again, lots of stories of people from Slade Park would be moved into new accommodation at Blackbird Leys. And this is what you find in the period through the 50s and 60s. The area, especially on the Shotover side of the camp, the Wood Farm side was being slightly developed in a slightly different way. People were moving on and they weren't being replaced. So very rapidly, you find that the huts fell into a state of disrepair, and the last families left the Shotover side in the early 1970s. The council acted quite quickly to take these structures down for fear of them being vandalised. I didn't know until quite recently about the fate of. I didn't realise this. I've been in one of these huts. I'm actually not as old as I look. I don't remember the huts themselves. But I've actually been in one of these huts because somebody told me. They said, "Do you know what happened to one of those huts?" They said it ended up in the garden of the Mason's Arms in Headington Quarry. So I remember as a kid going to many functions in this old rickety wooden hut in the garden behind the Mason's Arms in Headington Quarry, which it turns out all the time was a hut that had been obviously taken down, reassembled in the garden of the Masons. Sadly, not there anymore. It was removed. It was removed many years ago. But there may be bits of these huts in various gardens all over Oxford. It's not really sure. What is interesting to note is that when these huts were taken down, a lot of people reported that there were the marks inside. It said "Made in Canada." So potentially these huts were brought over by the Canadian forces, and certainly when you look at the old pictures, there is a slight sort of Canadian feel about the whole thing. They could be lumberjacks. They could be lumberjack pictures. There's certainly, whenever you see the old pictures, it has got that real pioneer spirit. Now, the Slade, if you go to the Shotover side of Slade Park right now, you will not see this open space that I've been describing, because the whole area pretty much is covered in trees. If you cross over at the crossing by where Aldi is, you do see an open space. That was where the original parade ground was. That wasn't planted with trees, but in the late 1970s, the whole area was planted with trees, and it was planted with trees. Well, I don't want to blame one person in particular, but that gentleman there is Mark Johnson. Mark Johnson is a good Headington lad, and in the late 1970s, he was employed on what was then called the Youth Opportunities Scheme. It became the YTS, and him and his mates were taken up to Slade Park, and they were told to plant lots of trees. So what they did was, this is the picture that Mark donated to the project. This is the area with the huts are gone, but this is the area before him and his team went up and planted the trees. So if you do go up to Slade Park, if you go up to visit Slade Park, and you look at the old camp section, you will notice that all the trees are planted in a straight line. And as Mark will actually say, we were given any old trees to plant. So there's no care in the planting at all. They're all odds and sods. But if you look down, you'll see they've all been planted in straight lines. Mark visits quite often, and again, his contribution to the project has been invaluable because he's got another story to tell about Slade Park. The people moved out, he moved in. It's a whole different story there. This is a picture of 4th Avenue. This is up towards the Ridings. Those trees are actually still there. You can still pick those trees out. And these are huts. So this is more or less opposite where Alan Briggs would have lived. So I went out there quite recently, and I thought I'd take a picture from where I think exactly the same spot is now. That's the same spot now. Totally overgrown. So a lot of the evidence has been taken away. But what I thought I would do is, I'd do the walk, I'd try and reconnect the camp if I possibly could. So I went down to Peppercorn Avenue. Just to say before that, if you go onto Google Maps, what's interesting is that there are some remnants of the old road system. On the Shotover side, you'll see 9th Avenue is still marked on Google Maps. If you look on the other side, 1st Avenue is still marked on the Wood Farm side. But I did my walk and I used Google Maps. I went over to Peppercorn Avenue, and Peppercorn Avenue was that group of houses that had been converted, group number 1 by Knowles and Son. So on the aerial map, when it was a complete map, it is that group of houses just there down by the Slade. So I went over and I started my walk at Peppercorn Avenue. Peppercorn Avenue is a very interesting place because that road is still the original road. It's still in the original layout. And you walk there, there's a sort of Scandinavian feel to the whole place. It's a very odd part of Oxford, I find. This is a picture, again, donated to the project of people living on Slade Park, standing on that exact same road. And if you go down Peppercorn Avenue now, and you look at the housing that is there, the housing sits on these are not original huts, they're not clad huts, they're replacement buildings. But they do very closely follow the original camp layout, both in layout and design. So you walk around and it has got that feel of being camp. I don't want to say if anyone lives there it's like an army camp, but it has that slight feel. And again, it feels different with the trees. It's much more low level, single story. So I went from Peppercorn Avenue and I then walked through the woods over to the connecting point that would have been the point that then connected on to link the two parts together. So I braved the ring road, didn't get killed, but if you look, there is actually a footpath, and I'm at that centre line I'm in there, that's a crossing point. So you still, if you're brave enough, you still can cross the bypass, walk in between this sort of zigzag pattern, cross over the road, and enter onto the Slade Park side of the Shotover side of Slade Park. And what you'll see now is there are some signs have been put up, and this is part of the ongoing project. That denotes Dorchester and Alchester. That's a gesture to the old Roman road. We've put up other signs. There's 9th Avenue. Interesting enough, this 9th Avenue sign is actually on the original concrete fitting. So that is on the original sign, the original army sign that would have been put there. And you start to walk around, and you can see you've got the signage, you've got the straight road, military, the regulation with military roads, and you also see that thanks to the project now, different areas are being identified. So there's the stores, just there. You go up to the top of Slade Camp, and you'll see that this is now the main entranceway, although this originally would have been the rear entrance to the camp itself. We've now marked it down as Slade Camp. Also, just the right, it's one of the probably most iconic little bits of the camp, the armed military camp that's left. Now I know, thanks to Brian Lowe, that is a Nikon pillbox, and that was produced. Essentially, it's a big concrete pipe with some holes cut in it to stick guns out of. But that would have been the sentry guarding point at the top of the camp, just there. You walk a bit further around in the 4th Avenue, you'll see these very impressive steps just here. Now, Jim Woods of Shotover Preservation Society, he said, when you go to Slade Camp, Maurice, he said, it's like Oxford's Angkor Wat. Now, he's got to work in sales, Jim, hasn't he? He's got to work in sales. I don't think we should set up a backpackers just yet, but this is an old officer's hut, and 18 months ago, this was covered over by vegetation. This has all been cleared back by volunteers who've got involved in the group. Oxford Preservation Trust, or also Shotover Preservation Society as well. A lot of hard work has gone into that. Also, the team at ODS, Gary at ODS, who's been absolutely fantastic, who's worked up there for donkey's years, they have all participated to clear this area and to make it, and to put up signage, and to start to reclaim this area, to say, yeah, this area is important. There is something here. And what is fascinating as well about someone like Wendy, who has a real passion for this, Wendy will take you to these places and she'll start looking at the marks on the concrete and she'll say, well, there used to be a chair here, or there used to be a basin here, or the door would open here. Piecing together these bits of the camp's history, putting it all together, and then linking up as well to people who actually lived in these, after the military use, who actually lived in these premises as well. And this is how the project is kind of snowballing. And from a volunteer section for Wendy appearing on Radio Oxford on the Sophie Laws show, talking about the camp project, to there being a small radio piece on BBC Sounds you can go and listen to pieces in the Oxford Mail. John Chipperfield, absolute stalwart journalist of local history and local projects, has really promoted us, has put things in memory lane in Oxford Mail. About the only thing worth reading in the Oxford Mail. I hope you don't drink some time, but that's just my opinion. If you move on a bit further, we've had fantastic help from Oxford Preservation Trust getting involved. Anna Revis is in the audience tonight. I can't thank her enough, and her team have been absolutely outstanding in getting behind this project, getting on board this project, and really supporting this project, because without their know-how, expertise and drive, we wouldn't have been able to get the Heritage Lottery Fund. You see just there, Memories Project receives a lottery fund, which is allowing us to produce a short film about the camp, to conduct oral histories, to produce a book, to put on events. So this is an event that we put on the Bullingdon Centre, again very close to Wood Farm, and really connecting people at Wood Farm and saying to Wood Farm, this is your history too. You're connected to Slade Camp. There may be a bypass here, but there's good local history that you can talk about. Also as well, we had another open day this year. Not so kind with the weather this year, but still, we had a good number of people turned up, including Agnes Bell, 97, who walked around in the pouring rain and gave us excellent information. So again, the project is snowboarding. Jim got some apples, got them pressed somewhere and produced Slade Camp apple juice. Absolutely fantastic. So there's been so many positive things that have come out of this project. So many people have come into it. People I've already mentioned have made this, have enabled me to stand up on this stage tonight and deliver this presentation for you. Now, what's next for the Slade Camp talk? Where could it possibly go? I've had a few inquiries. Let's just say there's a few deals in process. I'm not sure if I'll be at the MGM or the Bellagio, but this talk could be going international. Also, there have been some other fascinating sort of things, sidelines you get out of this. So Agnes Bell dropped in that her brother used to be a football player and he used to be captain of Headington United. He's a guy called Vic Barney. He also turns out that Vic Barney was a serviceman in Italy during the Second World War. He was stationed in Naples, and he became the first ever English player to play for Napoli FC, and he's revered over there as a bit of a hero. Amazing things. Also, we got another comment by Ronnie Barker. It's no joke. As we know, he's a local lad made good. He's got his own blue plaque. And Liz Woody was talking to a guy called Alan Trinder about his memories of growing up in Cowley in the Second World War. And Alan Trinder shared some memories about his time, and then he also said, I attended Oxford Boys' School in George Street at the same time as Ronnie Barker. And he is vice chairman of the Oxford Old Boys group, and he's got access to memorabilia from Ronnie Barker's old school. And in the original school register from Ronnie Barker's first year at school, there appears the name Norman Fletcher Taylor. Now the old boys suspect this could be the inspiration for the TV character Norman Stanley Fletcher in the TV series Porridge. I hope everyone's old enough to remember Porridge. Now you might be a bit ahead of me, because where did Norman Stanley Fletcher go to prison? Slade Prison. Now could it be? Could it be? Could it be? So I read his biography, and it turns out he doesn't mention it. So I don't know. So you get these lovely little side things. That's the beauty of local history projects. Suddenly you're talking about Napoli FC and Ronnie Barker and Slade Prison, all those sort of things. But at the heart of all of this is about people. And these are pictures that have been donated to us by people involved in the project who've given up their time and to get involved in it. And it is really, this is a special thing about this. This is a time and a place, a snapshot of time. It's about the Second World War. It's about 20th century Oxford. It's about the development of a town. It's about individual families. It's about people being given a start. It's about, say, going to a wooden hut on the foothills of Shotover and then digging out a garden, planting some plants, bringing up some children, having children born in the huts, going to work, and then moving on to a place at Blackbird Leys and keeping some little documents in a cardboard box, and then somebody knocks on your door 50 odd years later and says, "You got any information about Slade Park?" You say, "Yes, it's here." And that's the beauty of this. And that's why this project is so special and so important and so invigorating. If you go up to Slade Camp now, and I really encourage you to do so, and you go to 4th Avenue, you'll go to my favourite bit. This is number 94 4th Avenue. And you think, there we go, Maurice, what's this all about? Well, I love this because that's the entranceway to somebody's house. In amongst these bushes, there are still some chain link fence. And if you look at these privet hedges, you'll think they're not natural. That has been planted by somebody. That is evidence of somebody going there, planting a hedge and saying, this is my place. And if you go up with somebody there who really knows about plants, they'll take you around the plants, they'll look in the plants, they'll say, that's a cherry tree, that's an apple tree, that's a so-and-so. This shouldn't be here. It's evidence of human occupation. It may all be overgrown. It may all be tangled up with leaf mould and those sorts of things. But there's history. There's a richness under there. I know Wendy Austin is very keen. She's done an archaeological report to get a time team thing going on up there, digging through the soil, see what you can find, and put all these memories back together. I'll just finish with this gentleman. This is Trevor Joseph. He's a former resident. Trevor's been instrumental in this, and a lot of people, when you say to them, did you ever go back to Slade Camp? You ever go back to Slade Park? And they'll say no. Trevor's one of the exceptions. Trevor often goes back to relive childhood memories, to think things through. And when he first got involved in the project, he was talking to Jim Woods, and he said to Jim, do you know what, Jim, he said, I didn't think this would ever happen. And I think what he means by that is, I didn't think anyone would ever be interested in my history. I didn't think anyone would ever take the time to do some research, to put some meaning and put some value on this whole thing. But hopefully tonight, we've put some flesh on the bones, we've put some meaning and value into this. And hopefully this will be a template to go to other parts of Oxford, other communities, and to say, your community matters, your history matters, and it's really rich, and it's really exciting, and it's really, really fantastic thing to be involved in. Thank you very much.